Welcome to this special session on the open seas. I'm Wenguang Shao, Consulting Senior Fellow for China and International Affairs at IISS in London. In my day job, I also manage the European and African operations of Phoenix Satellite Television Group in Hong Kong and other media businesses from London. As you can see from the agenda, we have 4 panelists with us today, and they are to my right, Mr. Richard Fadden, Deputy Minister of National Defense representing Canada, and next to him, Admiral Locklear, Commander of the U.S. Command, representing the United States. And to my immediate left, Ambassador Ying, Standing Committee member and the Chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National People's Congress, representing China. And further left to her, Mr. Shinsuke Sugiyama, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs representing Japan. No doubt a very strong panel for this very important topic, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say we all look forward to this very exciting, interesting, and hopefully informative exchange of views. And my job as chair, as a priority, is to make everybody relax, particularly for those with competing views. Now, I say competing views for a good reason, because the theme of open seas is apt to give rise to various interpretations among policymakers, defense establishments, and academic institutions. So people may look at different aspects of the same issue and may even compare apples and pears. So I first of all would like to invite our panelists to just say very briefly a few words about what they think the theme or the term open seas actually means. I probably will start from the further right, Admiral Locklear.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chao, and thank you for the invitation, and thanks to the folks who came here to listen to this panel. I think it's an extremely important topic. The fact for all of us is that we are increasingly interconnected as a global society, as a global economy. This isn't the 1930s. This is the 21st century, where we are so interdependent on so many levels that the pathways that allow that interdependency have to be properly maintained and properly ruled in a way that ensures that we all have access and allows prosperity for our children and our grandchildren. In relation to the seas, we all have proven time and time again that 90% of everything that moves in the world moves on the oceans. And that 90% in the last 2 decades has quadrupled. It increased 4% just last year. And in this particular region, it's really important because 9 of the 10 largest ports in the world are in the Asia Pacific. Over half the world's trade in container and cargo vessels is originated from this part of the world. 70% of all seaborne energy sources come through this particular region on any given day. The Straits of Malacca, of which we sit only a few yards from, sees over 60,000 ships transit safely and carrying over a quarter of the world's trade. The United States, everybody says, well, what equities do we have here? The United States is the largest investor in ASEAN countries by a factor, a huge factor of the next 3 or 4 countries, 2, 3, and 4 countries put together. $1.2 trillion of U.S. trade is centered in this part of the world annually. And then we know that 70% of the world is covered with water, and that's not going to change. Of that 70%, when we start to talk about economic zones and freedom in those economic zones, 38% of all the oceans in the world fall within someone's economic zones. The United States has the largest and most comprehensive economic zones because of the size of our coast. So ensuring that the global connectedness can be maintained in the maritime domain in a way where every participant's interests are properly secured and that business feels that they can make the investments that allow them to move and transit goods around through the maritime domain is a critical underpinning of the future of this great globe. That's what it's about. So how do we make sure that that access is unimpeded and that we all benefit by it in a way under a set of rules that we all understand? And when we don't agree with them, that we have mechanisms by which we can arbitrate and get through them short of a gunboat diplomacy of any kind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Fadden, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. In terms of the importance of open seas, I'm not going to repeat what the Admiral just said, but in terms of a definition, and I stress that I'm not an international lawyer, but the definition I'd like to put out is a bit of a reverse definition. Any water on this planet that's not subject to the exclusive jurisdiction of a state, any bit of water that's not in a state's EEZ, to my mind, falls within a broad definition of the open oceans or the open seas. And I guess to add just a little bit to that, when we're talking about open seas, open oceans, I think we have to include every part of the world. I understand we're at the Shangri-La conference, and I understand we're in Asia, but it's not only important for this part of the world, it's important for every part of the world. And it's also important, I think, because it hasn't been emphasized here, not only for state purposes, but it's important for commerce, and it's indeed important for personal reasons. So my definition is a fairly broad one, and it's one that I think that is grounded in practical terms in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and for those parts that don't cover exactly what I've just said, customary international law. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I understand that you want to actually look at the broader picture of oceans and open seas, and then we can gradually focus on the Western Pacific, and particularly East China Sea and South China Sea, and then we will see the issues of overlapping sovereignty claims, etc. Yeah. So bear in mind, even though we try to define open seas as not subject to any country's jurisdiction, in reality, there could be overlapping claims. Thank you. Madame Ying.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with the distinguished panelists. And this is obviously not my familiar area, but I really want to echo the previous speakers about the importance of the sea, about the open sea. With the little bit of homework I did, open sea is a term more often used before the UNCLOS, and it refers to any sea that's outside territorial waters. I want to start to share with you my humble feeling about the importance, the value of the sea for the mankind. I think it's the most precious assets for human being. It's also the most important transportation passage for international trade, world economy, It also has rich resources, but if conflicts or war occurs, sea can also become a challenge. And in the old time for China, most of the threat, aggression, opium, everything came from the sea. So it's very important that in modern time we use the sea for peaceful purposes, and the challenges from the sea nowadays probably varies depending on where you are. For example, the small island states worry about the rising sea level. A friend of mine who is the former Maldives president showed me a footage of him having a cabinet meeting on the basement of the sea, indicating the worrying for those small states. The literate states, of course, are interested in the use of resources, and the seamen are interested in the safety of human lives. Politicians, the public, are very concerned about the protection of the rights, the interests of the countries. To be more specific about the challenges from the Chinese point of view, I think the natural calamities, as I mentioned in previous meetings, the tsunami which damaged Malacca and Singapore Strait facilities, typhoon, natural calamities, these are the kind of threats that can affect the use of open sea, and also accidents. Secondly, piracy, terrorism that can affect the freedom of navigation. I agree with Admiral Locklear that the freedom of navigation is very important. If it's important for U.S., probably the local transportation route is more important for China, for Japan, for the countries around. China is is the largest country for the flag state, the container port state, and littoral state. When 6 of the 10 largest container ports state in the world, 6 of the largest container ports in the world are from China. So for China, the freedom of navigation, safety of navigation is highly important. We're very much dependent on it. Thirdly, the disputes, maritime disputes, can affect normal economic activities in the sea, and also military security threat. Sometimes conflict of interest on land can also reflect in the sea. So how do we encounter these challenges? We are in the 21st century. We should not keep on resorting to the 20th century mentality, which is about war and conflict. I'm surprised, actually, at Shangri-La. I mentioned it to some of the organizers that we often hear languages more like in the 20th century than in the 21st century. In the 21st century, we don't have a world state, and no country can claim that they own the law, they own the management of the sea. All countries have to work together based on mutual respect. Not long ago, the CICA summit was held in Shanghai, where the Chinese president presided over and spoke about the Asian security approach. It was quite a systematic explanation and a summary of the ideas that are accumulated in Asia over the past years. At the center is common security, comprehensive security, cooperative security, and sustainable security. For us, we don't think countries can attain security at the cost, at the expense of other countries, and only a common security can sustain. So to achieve that, we were prefer to have candid dialogues to build strategic trust, to reduce mutual suspicion, and try to live in harmony. So I think on the maritime issues, it's important for the region to work very hard to cultivate the habit and the skills for cooperation, and to find to continue the path of safety, of building safety together in Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Fu Ying. You have particularly mentioned that the Law of the Sea Convention at least stipulates that the open seas, or the high seas according to the legal language, are reserved for peaceful purposes, and that one of the important principles is freedom of navigation. We'll come back to that. And of course, there are all kinds of benefits and opportunities that we can derive for mankind from the use of the seas. So we probably will later discuss exactly the mechanisms and ways and means of taking advantage of these opportunities, and then try to manage the maritime issues and resolve problems. Now, next is Mr. Sugiyama. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson Shao, and thank you for the introductory remarks of the previous speakers, Mr. Fadden and Admiral Locklear and Ambassador Ying, who happens to be a good friend of mine for by now 10 years or something. At the beginning, I first start with saying that it is a great honor, also, as a matter of fact, being included in this very high-powered panelists representing Japan. We are supposed to talk about one of the most and quite recently focused hot issues, some of which my Prime Minister happened to touch upon yesterday within the keynote speech. I didn't intend to follow on what my Prime Minister did make as a keynote speech. So I don't think I would like to repeat what my three previous speakers had said, or my Prime Minister did make abundantly clear about the importance of this subject matter. But among them all, this afternoon, after this introductory remarks, if I am allowed by Chairperson, after I speak up as a short, strong introductory remarks, I very much would like to speak up very much confrontational, non-politicized or non-emotional way, but rather strictly obstructive, strictly theoretical, strictly logical, and pure legalistic way. I happen to be a Deputy Foreign Minister for, by now, slightly less than 1 year or so, but I've been studying international law, and I have been a humble student of international law over the past 30 years or something, teaching at my university and studying things. And I do believe that every one of us here, on the podium as well as on the floor, or every one of the leaders of the major countries, wouldn't disagree that if there would be any problem, any disputes, any escalation of anything, everything must be settled peacefully through peaceful negotiation based upon international law. Now, what does it mean here by saying based upon international law? As a humble student in international law over the past some years, I would like to raise some of the theoretical, not real, cases later on for the food for thoughts for me to possibly able to contribute to this limited, very important and precious occasion to enhance our mutual understanding and some of the fruitful discussions. So as discussions go by, if at one point of time, if Chairperson Mr. Shao would allow me to speak up for some 3 to 5 minutes for me to be able to present you some of the purely logical, theoretical, and legalistic cases, as I said, for food for thoughts, but might be very much contributing to the current state of affairs. I think I am very much dying to do that after these introductory remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure there will be the opportunities to touch upon various aspects of international law as we go through some of the issues on the table. Now, I want to clear the first part of our discussion on the commerce and trades and navigation and free sea lanes of communication, etc. All these are very positive and very beneficial to mankind and to nations in Asia Pacific. As I can understand, as far as freedom of navigation and freedom in seaborne trade are concerned, there doesn't seem to be too much of a problem. One indicator is that the cost of shipping in this part of the world, in Asia Pacific, is comparatively low vis-a-vis the rest of the world, simply because even though there are territorial disputes and there are problems between nations, everybody sees this sense of preserving the freedom of navigation and the freedom of seaborne trade without let and hindrance. So if our panelists agree that we can move on to other issues that may give rise to disputes. Now, Madame Fu Ying mentioned a number of problems such as natural disasters ranging from oil spillover to natural disasters like tsunami, like Typhoon Haiyan and some other problems. And that could negate some of the benefits from the open sea, from the use of the open sea, from the use of the sea trade, etc. So I'd like our panelists maybe to spend a few minutes each to tell us how to redress the problems, what will be the mechanism to deal with either natural disasters or man-made disasters or incidents, etc. What will be the best ways and means of doing that, and how you see the possibilities, the opportunities and challenges in this area. I will start with Admiral Locklear.
Well, I think in the Asia Pacific community, my perspective is that we're doing a pretty good job in this area. I think that we have grown in our multilateral venues to include all the nations that, even the ones that have disputes of territorials and things like that, have come together to create architectures, particularly with seaborne and airborne assets, and communication pathways, in the incorporation of military forces with non-government organizations and special aid organizations that have been able to learn from the really difficult environment this part of the world experiences from natural disasters. I think you've already heard that about 80% of the most damaging natural disasters in the world occur here every year, and that number appears to be going up due to effects of climate change and the growing population here. So we're doing better in that, and you'll see a wide range of exercises throughout the region that the U.S. and China and Japan and Korea and we all and others, we all participate alongside each other, and that showed dividends in the most recent crises that we had, even the ones in the Philippines, where the response by the international community was much quicker than it had ever been before. And the militaries can't do it all; they can only enable it. So I think we're doing okay in that regard because we have a common understanding of the problem, and it's a common imperative to respond. So I see this as, of course, the freedom of navigation and the ability to operate freely in the airways and the seaways enable this, and so it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Fadden?
Thank you. I guess I would just add that if you're dealing with a crisis of whatever nature, one of the important things to do is to be able to put aside any legal or other difficulties you're having. It's not helpful if there's a natural disaster to be told by a particular country that the forces that the Admiral was talking about can't go there because there's a dispute. So in dealing with crises, with emergencies involving human life, I think the first thing that nations have to do is to say they are in a special category and they get treated in that fashion. I think generally as well, the most important thing that we can do is plan, is to acknowledge that there are going to be any number of disasters in the years ahead, plan for them, coordinate, ensure that there are protocols in order to deal with them, and not let ourselves be bound by prejudices or misunderstandings or even, as I said, disputes on legal issues. I think essentially they need to be put in a special category, and all of the things that the Admiral was talking about need to be made and systematized. Thank you.
May I just ask you a follow-up question on that, to put aside legal disputes and prejudices, etc. But in the case of a collaboration for the search of missing Malaysian airline, one issue, I'm sure people around the table and other parts of the room understand, is the ability of nations participating to share sensitive capability information. Even though there is no dispute, it's almost by instinct that they want to keep some of the data because they are extremely sensitive and revealing to their capabilities in terms of satellite, in terms of sonar, in terms of whatever equipment they may have.
I think that's fair. I also think you can't generalize because in some instances nations have shared sensitive technologies and whatnot. But I think there's a difference between having to share technologies and special ways of doing things. There's a difference between that and actually sharing the information that will aid with searches, for example. I think that happens quite often between nations who don't have a full exchange on intelligence and other matters. You talk about the product, you provide the product, but you don't necessarily explain in great detail how you do things technically. And I do understand that's happened in a couple of the instances surrounding the case that you mentioned.
Well, would you agree, Admiral Locklear, that you share the product but not necessarily revealing the capabilities?
Well, I would agree that where it comes from is less important about what it says and what you do with it. First, we still very much mourn the loss of this aircraft and feel very much sorrowful for the families who have not come to resolution on this. And I can assure you that we're all committed to trying to find where it happened to this aircraft. But it has challenged all of us, and quite frankly, even though it wasn't a perfect scenario, it was the largest search and rescue effort in the history of mankind. It's never been done like that before. And even though we haven't been successful yet, We saw nations come together and provide information, even though it might have been as smoothly as it could have been, in a way that I think is historic in the history of this globe. And so we should learn from the goodness of that, even though it's a tragedy. And we should build on the lessons learned of where we had problems, where we had information sharing issues, where were the interest of an individual state at the time it needed to be more open. Could it have been more open? We've been in dialogue with the ASEAN nations about this, and with other 8 nations in the region. We will have this dialogue during our dialogue with our Chinese partners as well, because this is important to get this right, and it does build trust and confidence in the long run. The next one we have, the next event like this, God forbid, will be better as a world dealing with it.
Thank you. Madame Fu Ying, can you say a few words about how people in this room and the decision makers can make sure that next time there are natural disasters, that nations will be better prepared and better coordinated to deal with them collectively?
Mr. Shao, Mr. Shao, I'm sure for many in China, the MH370 is a painful puzzle, and people are really looking forward to having having at least some clue where it's about. And I tend to agree with the previous speakers that during this search and rescue, we're seeing this strong effort for all the countries concerned, even for those who have never had any experience of that type. Malaysia, China, and Vietnam all embraced cooperation, and then we had Australia and US support. And I'm sure lessons will be learned from this disaster, and that's how humankind move forward. A few more words about this subject. I'm glad that Shao mentioned that there is no problem for freedom navigation in this region. In the previous time, the freedom of navigation has always been an excuse of a worry for this area, as if in the South China Sea sky is falling and the freedom of and safety of navigation is in deep trouble. Actually, we're having strong cooperation, ensuring continued freedom and safety of navigation in this region. For China, it's a country which has grown into economic power, not with the flag ahead of its trade. And globalization has allowed the space for countries like China, developing countries, to grow its economy. And China is a benefactor of a peaceful environment, and therefore now China should undertake greater international responsibilities for peace. And China has been an active participant in ensuring the freedom of and safety of navigation in the region. For example, since 2007, when the mechanism for ensuring safety in Malacca Strait was set up, Chinese government has been offering financial assistance. It has also undertaken some security projects which are proposed by the littoral state. And the main security cooperation China has been undertaking is with the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is the leading security framework in this region. And China has offered to host the fourth search and rescue exercises with Malaysia in AIF February next year, and we are also proposing to have a seminar on the safety of navigation, maritime navigation in AIF. Furthermore, China, since 2008, has started to have to send a ship to Bay of Aden for escorting activities. This is the first time for the Chinese Navy to undertake international UN missions. And in 5 years, it has escorted 5,600 ships, and more than half of it are from foreign countries. And we hope that the China and the Chinese Navy will continue to raise this kind of capabilities. And I also want to express a welcome to the defense forces from all over the world and from the region to take part more in exercise in search and rescue exercises, in helping the search and rescue activities in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to the military uses for peaceful purposes of such as anti-piracy escorts and search and rescue involving military, naval ships and aircraft, etc., in connection with the military operations at sea. Now, I'd like to invite Sugiyama, also on the subject of,
yes, of course,
finding ways and means of.
Thank you, Chairperson Shao. First, I feel I must touch upon the subject matter which we are now discussing, namely natural disasters and these so-called, untraditional security matters, cooperations, and particularly concerning seas. We do believe that this is one of the most important recent new challenges in parallel to such things as climate change. So my country, and particularly my Prime Minister's government, has been very much keenly making endeavors to be more cooperative with ASEAN countries or Australia, so of course let alone my ally United States, and Chinese and ROKs, and even outside of this region. So I don't think we would have to spend that much time to put an emphasis upon the importance of how much you must do further, including such things like anti-piracy things and all these sort of non-traditional security matters or something. That said, as I warned you, if I would be permitted to spend just a couple of minutes, the Ambassador Fuin said freedom of navigation something, and others presumably seems to have touched upon the importance of the international law UNCLOS and the rule of law, which was emphasized by my Prime Minister towards the end of his keynote speech. As I said, I didn't have any intention to follow on in participating into this discussion place, but nonetheless, as I said, whatever the subject matters concerning sea, or as a matter of fact, everything in international relations. But here we're talking about the sea, the challenges of the management and everything. People are saying that we must abide by international law, and international law is the basis. And we must seek a peaceful solution through international law. But as I said, what is the meaning of the abidance by international law? As Chairperson Shao did say rightly, that there are some sort of differences, interpretations. There are some sort of differences of implementations or adaptation of certain sort of international legal provisions and everything, even when it comes to some of the provisions of articles of UNCLOS, let alone not written in UNCLOS. But nonetheless, I do believe that presumably, fundamentally because I am more international lawyer than a humble public servant working for my humble nation, I am always sort of, feeling dubious that everybody is saying international law importance, but no one seems to be talking about the specific importance of specific points. Now, I know a time limitation, and I do believe that the international community today is seeing many legal problems in the field of what we are talking about. And I could mention whole numbers of cases with legal points under today's theme, on which some of us disagree, on which some of us totally agree. But I will avoid touching upon them all simply because of the time limit. Maybe I can spend 3 minutes, 4 minutes maximum. So
I'm
let
sure
me.
I will ask you a specific question
Yes,
that will give
that's
you
right. Therefore, let me try to pose 3 cases in a very abstract form. Mind you, I'm not saying anything concrete. I'm not saying anything specific country's case or country's case. I'm not saying anything my case. I'm simply trying to put 3 cases on this floor to ask every one of your participants possible response, if there would be any who can do that. Number 1, a theoretical case in which one coastal state asserts its rights extensively to a vast maritime area without specifying geographical coordinates for presenting a chart of its geographical limitation with no specific latitudes or longitudes and lines. That one coastal state doesn't clarify legal status and basis of its claims either, nor does it clarify even the legal nature of rights themselves that it is claiming. Should this case exist, such claims would neither be in line with the scope of the sovereignty of the coastal state over the territorial water being given by the UNCLOS provisions, nor sovereign rights over the EEZ or continental shelf enshrined in other provisions of UNCLOS or any other established general international law. How could that coastal state make its legitimate legal claim in this case? I'm not going to go further, but I just wonder if anyone on the podium or on the floor would be able to be in a position to give me purely legalistic justification or legitimization on this case. And I would very much welcome as a humble international legal student. Case number 2. This is concerning the limited areas where coastal states' claims overlap, which is quite often happening. To my country, to presumably many of your countries, unless you are a landlocked country. The UNCLOS provides for the provisions of Article 74, paragraph 3 on the EEZ, and the provision of Article 83, paragraph 3 on the continental shelf, stipulating obligations of the states with opposite or adjacent coastal states. Here, I do not have any intention to table the legal points on how the delimitation should be done, which is presumably beyond this conference table. My point is this. Suppose that one coastal state takes a unilateral action such as an exploratory drilling. Once again, exploratory drilling, not a mere seismic testing, that leads to a permanent physical change to the maritime environment of the undelimited area where overlapping claims concerning EEZ or continental shelf exist. How can this action be justified according to the international law? I don't want to be too specific and too legalistic. Lawyers tend to be too legalistic and try to be everything which legal points would be pointed out. But let me recall here that there is one specific arbitral tribunal case in award prescribed in 2007 found that such an action constitutes a violation to the obligation of the state under the said provisions of UNCLOS by activities having a permanent physical impact. I will not go into details of the award.
We go down to the third one.
Okay. So given the jurisprudence, if anyone on the panel or on the floor who can explain clearly the legal grounds to justify them. Okay, just one word about the case number 3. Suppose that one coastal state established a structure in its EEZ imposing grounded or a no-go zone against other states' vessels with the breadth of several nautical miles or several thousand meters, which well exceeds the authorized breadth of 500 meters in regard to the safety zone as provided for in the provisions of Article 60 of UNCLOS. On this one too, again, I am not saying anything specific. I'm not saying anything real. I'm not saying something obstructive, untheoretical, unlegal. Can anyone over this table be in a position to justify this setup, hypothetical, from the very legal viewpoint? As a humble legal student, I very much welcome anyone to respond to me purely legal, not political. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sugiyama. You are pretty clear and explicit. You don't have to be beating around the bush. We know that there are territorial disputes simply because the open seas as a definition of space is fraught with difficulty, as they are in the case of South China Sea and others, almost entirely surrounded by territorial waters and exclusive economic zones of nations bordering on them. And they contain islands and features claimed by nations as an extension of their territorial jurisdiction. So the space completely left open and free is actually relatively limited. So it follows that realistically one cannot discuss the issue of the open seas without touching upon the competing territorial claims of nations adjacent to them. And there are bound to be different views, as I said at the very beginning, competing views as to how to resolve the issue. Now, you mentioned in your hypothetical cases UNCLOS. And I remember when I was young, I was interpreter at the United Nations, and particularly the third United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, 73 to 82. Eventually, under the able chairmanship of Ambassador Tommy Ko, it came to a fruitful conclusion. And 94, the treaty is ready for signature and ratification. Of course, there are nations that have reserved the rights for jurisdiction and for arbitration and a legal ruling. And there are even nations that have failed to ratify the treaty. So my question actually also hypothetical, is UNCLOS actually very useful in terms of enforcement, in terms of settlement of disputes? Because traditionally, when I was a student of law, people talk about conflict of laws. There was no such a thing, according to my American professor, as international law. Because there is no enforcement, there is no sovereignty, there is no higher authority to enforce the law. So a cynical view is that it's all about power politics when it comes to high sea matters. Whether there is any usefulness for using UNCLOS or international law to settle disputes when there are different interpretations and there are different ways of using or treating the law is open question. So I have in my mind some doubts as to whether it is actually possible to base all our policies and actions on law, when in international affairs there is no such higher authority except the United Nations and ICJ. Maybe I can invite our panelists to discuss this issue a little bit before we move on to other issues. Madame Fu?
Which one are we on?
On the hypothetical issues of using international law to settle the disputes.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank Sugiyama for your legalistic lecture. I'm not sure.
Usually, legalistic is a bad name, isn't it?
I think it's hard to argue with the legal professor, but it's very important for me to set the record straight about certain issues. And I also want to state that I'm not targeting at Professor Sugiyama, and I'm only stating some facts. My understanding of the international law is that there are very clear stipulations about how a territory is discovered and is taken and is legally registered. And the Nansha, Xisha, Zhongsha, Dongsha, all those islands in the South China Sea were discovered by the Chinese long time ago, and there were very clear and hundreds of years of record. And if you could go back, there were even 1,000 years of record of Chinese activities in those islands. So China has a very clear claim on those islands. And unfortunately, during the Second World War, the Japanese imperialism, when occupied China, also occupied the Nansha Island and Xisha Islands. And at the end of the war, thanks to the Cairo Declaration and Boston Proclamation, all the islands, it was clearly mentioned that the islands taken from China during the war included those taken after the Jiawu War in the early 19th century, late 19th century, were all returned to China. So I think both Japanese government and the U.S. government, who was a very important party to the winning of the war, have a very clear record of these returns. And the current disputes occurred after the 1960s, 70s. After the Cold War, China and ASEAN countries, including those who were in dispute with China, had long and repeated discussions about how should we address these problems. And thanks to the painstaking effort, consensus were reached to some kind of putting the disputes aside while working on the joint cooperation, moving on with our relationship, at the same time keeping engaged in dialogues. And these principles are enshrined in the DOC. It's unfortunate that recently some more tension is occurring. I think China sometimes is confronted with difficult challenges, especially when some countries provoke unilaterally the status quo. But I think if China and ASEAN countries could sit down and come back to the DOC principles, it shouldn't be difficult for us to find a way to maintain the peace and stability in the region. I don't know if I should go on with the other three examples, maybe
not, yeah.
But
we have
can I
just 30 minutes?
Can I make one interesting point to Mr. Sugiyama? This one is to you and to your Prime Minister. I'm amazed how often you like to use the word international law, and sometimes you even sounds like you own the law. But what I want to suggest is that I think Prime Minister Abe could set a very good example of abiding by the law by announcing that you would ban the the hunting of whales. And the UNCLOS has very clear stipulations about peaceful use of the high sea, and also having scientific and science research in the high sea, but not in that name hunting whales. That's a friendly suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, please, go ahead, yeah.
I just wanted to take us down a slightly different legal path. Unlike my colleague on the extreme left, I'm really not an international lawyer, but still trying to answer the chair's question about the utility of international law. It seems to me that there are two components to that. There are legal situations such as the three that have just been set out. There are any number of others. And these can be resolved and should be resolved through a variety of means, including discussion and dialogue. But it seems to me that international law, however that is defined, is particularly clear on one point, which is that state-based kinetic action should not be used against other states, period. I mean, that's not in UNCLOS, that's in the UN Charter. It basically means that one state can't send a gunboat, a Coast Guard vessel, a fisheries vessel, or any other kind of vessel that can do harm to another state in order to advance its position respecting one form or other of a dispute. So I guess if I go back to the chair's point that that again is not enforceable because we don't have a world government, but it seems to me that since the Second World War, if we've agreed on one thing in principle, certainly for a practitioner like me of government, that's the one that's the most important. There are any number of ways you can try and resolve the legal issues at play, but you cannot use state-based force in order to advance your position. And that, to my mind, is one of the big issues in this part of the world. People are using, to one extent or the other, off and on, their armed forces or other instruments of the state in order to advance their legal claims. That is equally an important issue. And whether it's enforceable or not, if there's any principle of international law in which I think we've gained acceptance for the last 50 or 60 or 70 years, it's that you don't go to war. People haven't gone to war, but they have used warlike powers, warlike instruments. So two components, I think, to your international law argument.
Sorry. Thank you very much. And this discussion actually naturally leads to the third component or area of interest that I want our panels to discuss, which is the military activities and naval operations at sea. We know that nations use naval ships and military aircraft for anti-piracy escorts and humanitarian operations at times of natural disasters. But the question remains as to other purposes of military activities at sea during peaceful times. I mentioned earlier that Part 7 of UNCLOS refers to high seas being reserved for peaceful purposes, but we know in reality there are thousands of military aircraft and hundreds of ships plying the waters close to the territorial waters of nations all over the world. And there are about to be questions as to why at peaceful times we still need so many military activities. And I'd like Admiral Locklear to discuss this a little bit, because we know for the past 69 years, American 7th Fleet, based in Japan, have been plying the waters of the Western Pacific. And you are also committed to defend the security interests of the nations and the treaties. So maybe you can say a few words about the non-humanitarian military activities at sea. Thanks.
Well, thank you. You know it's the position of the United States that we have full respect for the territorial seas of all sovereign nations, and we abide by that. We also respect the provisions of the exclusive economic zones that allow you to manage the resources in there, from the seabed to the fish. But we differ from some of our partners in that we believe that the security and the ability to ensure that we have a stable environment in the maritime commons, in the air commons, is a right of nations to do so. Let me give you an example of what can happen. Many of you probably didn't watch this, but in the mid-'80s, we had the tanker wars in the Persian Gulf, and I participated in that environment where many nation states had to use the military to be able to ensure that the goods and services that came from the Middle East, in particular the energy sources that basically fueled not only our country but all the countries in this region, were secure. If we had acquiesced to a policy that said that military operations in someone's EEZs were not allowed unless they gave you permission, then the belligerent states at that time in the Gulf would have shut it down. And so, as I said earlier, 38% of all the oceans are in someone's EEZs. Every major choke point of which all the goods flow on the maritime domain are someone's EEZs. I can't imagine any country saying that they would give up their sovereign right to protect their interest in international waters and international airspace just because it's in someone's EEZ. So the operations we do here, we've been here for 70 years or longer. We believe that the military, the U.S. military presence here has been rather benevolent, that we haven't been aggressive to states here, and that we have helped provide an architecture of security that has enabled the rise of every country here, including China and including India and including Indonesia and the Philippines, and that needs to continue for another 70 years. The idea that you would be able to have, in the complex world we have today, a secure maritime environment by everybody just leaving it and going home and leaving it up to the bordering states to manage it, not realistic, not in this century.
Thank you very much. Given the time constraint, if our fellow panelists agree, we have about 20 minutes for the floor. So I'd like to give our audience, our participants, a chance to ask questions. And please raise your hands, and I will call on maybe three at a time. Mr. Wang, Mr. Lee, and I can't really see Mr. Meyer. Munir, yeah. You begin first. From Malaysia, right? Yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I notice, Mr. Chairman, that there's no ASEAN representative, so to speak, on the panel discussing issues which obviously, do affect ASEAN. And I'd like to take up the point made by Madam Fu Ying in respect of the DOC. Now, China has made many excellent statements and indeed good proposals with respect to how the South China Sea disputes and issues could be sort of addressed. It has stated, for example, that the South China Sea disputes do not represent the be-all and end-all of China-ASEAN relations, which is very true. Those relations are very deep, they're very economic, a lot of big trade movements take place, and this has occurred over a period of over 10 years, over a decade. China has also proposed that there be joint development of resources in the South China Sea. Now, the question is, who is going to make the kind of investment in an uncertain environment in the South China Sea? Because of the uncertainty, no one will make that investment. To achieve that certainty without resolving the sovereign dispute issues, quite obviously the code of conduct, a legally binding code of conduct, is a necessity. And therefore, to make it credible, China's suggestions and proposals about having joint development cannot be credible unless China also agrees to the COC. Why is China so reluctant to do so? And therefore, China also says, more largely, that it prefers Asian disputes, Asian issues, to be resolved or addressed by Asians. Now, wouldn't this be a splendid example, if there was a COC, of an Asian situation being addressed by Asians to achieve a certain end of joint development? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wang?
Maybe first to answer you, even it's not my job, but your misunderstanding about the Asian people to solve the Asian security. I think that in Xi's speech, he said that Asian security fundamentally rely on Asian people, Asian wisdom, not just exclusive to other stakeholders. Americans, you exist here. Americans also can be Asian people. So they're not, my question is to the Leonora Locklear. You mentioned about the EEZ, something like it's not good at the freedom of navigation. It depends on what kind of purpose of the freedom of navigation. It's like you mentioned about the open sea. It's open to whom? Open for what kind of purpose? It's open only for the strong side, which have the aircraft carrier or the submarine, not including open to like Mongolia, who does not have the sea. This is not inclusive. If you're only open to the strong side and make the weak side be ignored the interests, I think there'll be some problems. And open for what kind of purpose? It's just open for the civilian gathering. If they just want to open for to show the muscles, this is not good for the spirit of the open sea. So in Asia Pacific, there's no maritime cooperation organization, which I proposed several years ago, that we can include the U.S. airlines and the ASEAN and others, make this to solve the problems of the dispute, and also high sea and open sea, like the G20. We need a G20, but G7 is still the base. So maybe we need a maritime cooperation organization in Asia Pacific, which include a U.S.-led airline system and ASEAN-led security architecture and others. What kind of your response to this initiative?
Thank you. Lee?
I have a question for Sugiyama-san. You, of course, the rule of law seems to be your theme today. And yesterday, your Prime Minister, of course, mentioned the rule of law many, many times and adamantly stated that rule of law should be the only basis for any and all disputes. Yeah. So, but it seems to me that Japan has devised a very elegant strategy to get around this whole thing by simply refusing to recognize there's any dispute on Diaoyu Island. So, of course, if there are no disputes, then the rule of law is completely irrelevant. I think it's brilliant, really. It works beautifully for Japan. Congratulations. But since you cannot copyright this strategy, do you not worry that if every other country were to copy your strategy and simply say there are no disputes when there are disputes, and it renders the rule of law that you espouse so passionately completely meaningless?
I'd like our panelists to answer the first round of questions before I ask the next round. Madame Fu Ying, about investments in an uncertain environment in South China Sea.
Thank you. Thank you. It's about COC and DOC. As far as I know, the Chinese diplomats and ASEAN at different levels, senior officials and foreign vice ministers, they are engaged in a discussion about the possibility of COC and the implementation of DOC. And there is also a proposal of a second track. I'm not following very closely, but as far as I know, the process is going on. But now I'm not a diplomat, I'm from the Congress. So I also want to express some of the views from the Chinese public. That is, DOC has been achieved after 10 long years of negotiations, and the members who signed to it are committed to the principles. But are some of the members of ASEAN thinking that DOC is one-way track? DOC is only for China, and ASEAN members are not bound by the DOC principles. So in case of ASEAN members, some of your members violate the principles, can ASEAN prove its credibility by disciplinizing your own members? Otherwise, how can we move on to COC? But I think during the few rounds of meetings between ASEAN members and China, I'm glad that there is a reaffirmed commitment about the implementation of the DOC, and the discussion of COC is a part of this implementation. And I hope there will be a meaningful result of the discussions. But obviously, ASEAN and China, we both confront challenges given the new environment.
Thank you. Locklear?
Well, thank you, Mr. Wang. Let me ask you a question first. Have you ever been on a ship for any prolonged period of time in the South China Sea or in the Pacific? Yeah, so, well, I have. I've spent about 60% of my life in the Pacific and in the oceans, dealing with this throughout the world. And so I think you and I have basically an ideological difference about what maritime military power does. You see it as muscle and provocative. I think because of really the limited perspective you have from where you sit. I see it as stabilizing. I see it as an ability for nations to come together, to put forces together that have the ability to sense what's happening, to command and control what's happening together in a collective way, as a stabilizing influence that allows free trade and commerce. I mean, go back 70 years and find an incident where, let's take the United States Navy or one of our allies' navies, have bullied another nation or stopped free trade or threatened the territorial integrity of a country here. It just hasn't happened. The sole purpose for our military presence here is to ensure U.S. interest and to ensure peace and prosperity in this region. So we have an ideological difference. That said, I agree with you on the second part, is that we need to continue to pursue mechanisms to deal with these types of maritime discussions. We have those. They're growing. We just had the Western Pacific Naval Symposium, which was hosted in Beijing, of which all the chief of navies from all the nations throughout the Asia Pacific, including ASEAN, went into Beijing, and they walked out with signing what was the Qs, which is the close
in Qingdao, actually.
Qingdao, I'm sorry, in Qingdao. I got corrected. And they signed the Qs, which was a historic event. I mean, it's where all of the chiefs of navies decided that there was a way that we encounter each other on the high seas and that we abide by it, and we all signed that. We have a bilateral mechanism between us and the PLA Navy to be able to discuss maritime issues, air encounters when we're unhappy with each other, and we exercise this frequently. So to say that these aren't out there, I think is not correct. To say that we need more and better, I agree.
Thank you. Sugiyama, to answer the question about Diaoyu disputes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel I'm obliged to get back to you, Mr. Lee. But my answer is very simple and very easy. Okay, suppose country Y owns island A forever, 4 years. But at the same time, country X has been claiming its territorial sovereignty. I wouldn't say since only 1971, but that's not the point. Okay, the point is the fact shows Y owns, having been exerting effective administrative controls over years. It is not Y, but it is X who is claiming. By the way, in this case, Y accepts compulsory jurisdiction of International Court of Justice. So if Y is being sued to International Court of Justice, Y should be in a position to accept that. Now, it must be X under the normal commonsensical situation who should be in a position to sue that party Y in this sovereignty. And I wonder why this country X hasn't done that. By the way, this country X doesn't seem to be accepted any compulsory jurisdiction of anything, ICJ or whatever. But yeah, that's another story. But it is quite simple.
Can we stop here?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. I'd like to have another round of questions. Tommy Ko, Bonnie, and Colonel Zhou. Start with Tommy Ko, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by replying to you. I hope I'm not being disrespectful, but you asked a question earlier whether international law has any utility and whether the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is a benchmark against which we must consider the conduct of states in the oceans and seas of the world. My brief response to you is that we don't live in a perfect world, but we don't live in a lawless world either. And I would make the point to you that all countries, big and small, powerful and not so powerful, are better off living in a world where there are laws, principles, and rules than in a world in which they are absent. My second point is that the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea has come to be accepted by almost all the countries of the world as the constitution for the oceans. Even countries such as the United States, which have not yet ratified the convention, has said repeatedly, and this morning we heard it from Secretary Hagel, that the United States regards the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea as the authoritative modern law of the sea, and the United States seeks to comply with its provisions. Mr. Chairman, I want to make one reference to a point made by my brother Munir from Malaysia and a response from my good friend Fu Ying. Munir made an appeal to China, which is that in 2002 we concluded the Declaration of Conduct, but we need to make one step forward. The Declaration of Conduct is non-binding. It has been somewhat useful as a confidence-building measure, but China and ASEAN need to take another step forward. We need to negotiate, agree upon, and conclude as soon as possible a binding code of conduct. I think the negotiations have begun, and I'm sure that my Chinese colleagues have every intention to conclude the code of conduct with ASEAN as expeditiously as possible. I want to assure my good friend Fu Ying that we in ASEAN do not regard the DOC or the yet to be concluded COC as a one-way street, as applying only to China but not to ASEAN. And I hope that my ASEAN brothers and sisters will forgive me for being very frank this afternoon when I say, as an objective person from a non-claimant country, and when I look at the conduct of China and the ASEAN claimant countries, my sad conclusion is that none of the claimant countries, whether China or ASEAN, with the exception of Brunei, has complied with the letter and spirit of the DOC. China and 3 of the 4 ASEAN claimant countries have acted in a manner which is inconsistent with the letter and spirit of the DOC. I want to say a word to my friend Minister Sugiyama, since we are both professors of international law. Your 3 hypothetical cases has a strange resemblance to reality. But every good judge knows that he shouldn't answer hypothetical questions. So I will not answer your 3 hypothetical questions, except to make 2 general observations. Number 1, coastal states, in drawing its maritime boundaries, in making claims, should act faithfully in compliance with UNCLOS. And again, when I look at the conduct of states, I'm very sad to tell you that many states have not acted faithfully. A good friend of mine called Ashley Roach has published a very good book called Excessive Claims on the Law of the Sea. There is unfortunately very little integrity in this world, and many coastal states have made claims which are not supported by the law. So that's my answer to your first question. My answer to your second question is, when can a coastal state undertake drilling in its economic zone and continental shelf? A coastal state may generally undertake drilling in its economic zone and continental shelf unless it is in a disputed area, you know. So the question is whether, are you talking about an area that's in dispute or is not in dispute, you know. So I can't answer that this in a hypothetical situation. We must refer to a concrete case, and we must look deeply into what the relevant facts are. I will just conclude by making one comment on what my good friend Fu Ying said about acquisition of territory. There are clear rules in international law governing the acquisition of territory. China's case is that China had historically acquired the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands in accordance with the rules governing the acquisition of territory. Those who have sovereignty claims to the Paracel Islands and Spratly Islands would, of course, dispute China's claim. The dilemma we are in is that there is no way to ascertain who has a better claim, since there is no forum in which these competing claims can be heard and resolved. And I want to conclude by putting Minister Sugiyama on the hot seat. I want to respectfully say to you, as an international lawyer, that Japan's position that there is no dispute with China over Senkaku Diaoyi is, in my view, untenable. The whole world knows that there is a dispute between Japan and China over Senkaku Diaoyi. So what I ask you, as one international lawyer to another, why don't you acknowledge that there is a dispute? And since the two of you can't agree on who has a better claim, why don't you take the moral high ground and say to your sister sitting on your right that let us refer this dispute to the International Court of Justice?
Thank you, Bonnie. We don't have a lot of time, so please be brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to be brief. I want to ask Ambassador Fu Ying to explain your perspective on whether the 9-dash line is consistent with this concept of open seas. And I think in order to answer that question, we have to really have a clear definition as to what the 9-dash line is. It's my view that this lack of clarity or ambiguity about the 9-dash line is in fact largely the source of a great deal of the instability and tensions that exist in the region. So yesterday when I asked you a question at the debate last night, you welcomed the opportunity to clarify China's position on Scarborough Shoal. So I hope that you will also welcome this opportunity to tell those present today what the 9-dash line is, what it means, and how it is consistent with the concept of open seas.
Thank you. Colonel Zhou.
I have no questions, but just two quick comments. After hearing from all the speakers, my conclusion is I still would like to live the simple life of a soldier rather than being a complicated student of international law. First, I would give a few remarks toward what Admiral Locklear has kind of mentioned. I fully agree with you how important it is for us to make joint efforts toward disaster relief. China, being a large country, is not free or short of natural disasters. And according to China's constitution, PLA has a mandate to help the social development, which naturally would include such responsibilities. And because of this spilling over, so we actually have done a lot of seminars or joint exercises with ASEAN countries and with the United States. And the things between China and the United States is always somewhat complicated. Over years, we have been doing sand table exercises, but we're happy that recently things seems to be progressing quite well with, for example, your invitation to us for joining the Copper Gold exercises and your invitation to us to attend the RIMPAC 2014. All these demonstrate the need for us to move in the right direction. I just hope that this good momentum will continue. Now, the second thing is about the freedom of navigation. The most interesting thing about Sino-US relationship is that sometimes we talk about the two sides of the same coin. For example, trust versus transparency. From a US perspective, you would like China to be transparent, and without transparency, how can we trust you? But China insists, if you don't trust us, how can we become transparent? Second thing is, sometimes we talk about the same thing, but it means different thing. For example, freedom of navigation. All of us quote UNCLOS to justify our own stance. But the truth is, as is concluded during one of the bilateral meetings headed by me from Chinese side with my counterpart in the US in the Pentagon, there is no will for us to justify our own stance just from UNCLOS. UNCLOS is full of loopholes for us to make use of. So, for example, you quote the first paragraph of Article 58, citing that all countries enjoy freedom of navigation and overflight. We say yes, but look, there is paragraph 3, which said, in carrying out such duties, the due regard should be paid to the littoral states. So we cannot reach agreement on the definition of UNCLOS, although we all agree that we need to have freedom of navigation. So probably the real way out is for us to cooperate wherever we can. For example, in jointly safeguarding sea line of communication, which is what we are doing, for example, in the Gulf of Aden, in tandem with the navies of over 20 countries. This is a great story of success, and we are doing in tandem. And we did 2 exercises over there. The first exercise is so simple, we just make a kind of onboard inspection. That's all. But during the second exercise, we jointly shoot at the target on the sea with cannons. And this looks good on TV cameras. It shows that both China and the United States could still agree sometimes on something. This is a powerful message sent to the whole world. And with the successful conclusion of CUS, it provides us another modality to somehow bypass our differences of this kind of tit-for-tat acquisition of reconnaissance in EEZ, So we actually have made progress, and for that, we need to build upon it and make fresh progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In view of the time factor, I don't think we'll be able to carry on, even though we are far from having exhausted all the questions and certainly not all the answers to various points raised by the audience. And I apologize for not being able to give other people the chance to raise questions because I've been reminded that the time has really passed for us to bring this to a close. I will say no more, and I'd like to all thank our panelists for their contributions. Thank you.
Time a U.S. diplomat dealing with Korea, but that was some time ago. We have people from countries that are directly involved in talks with North Korea and from a country that pays close attention to the region. I'd like to go in a little bit different order than is listed in the program. I had the devilish idea of asking speakers in reverse order to those who accepted the invitation. But that would put an onus on those who accepted last. And I only know the one who accepted first, which was Tom Countryman. So I'm going to ask him to go last. And I'm going to ask others to go in the order listed, not because they were the last to respond, because I'm sure that's not the case. But we're going to have no more than 5 minutes of remarks from each of the opening panelists, and then we'll have some discussion. It won't be question, answer, it'll be question, comment, and then if anybody from the panel wants to comment, they have the chance. Otherwise, at the end, I'll give them each a chance. So starting off, Brigadier General Lee Sang-chul, who's the Director General of the Arms Verification Agency in the Republic of Korea Ministry of National Defense. General Lee has been dealing with North Korea for many years. For 20 years, he was involved in North-South military talks in his position as the Director of the Arms Control Division of the National Defense Ministry. He'll be followed by Dr. Justin Baiz, the Director of the Policy Planning Staff of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Development. He's a scholar diplomat, historian of international relations and the United States. I saw in his bio that he's coming out with a bio of Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who I think was instrumental in persuading Jimmy Carter not to withdraw troops from South Korea back then. Dr. Alexander Dinkin, the Director of the Institute of World Economy and International Relations of the Russian Academy of Sciences, will follow. He's a professor of economics and academic secretary of the Russian Academy of Sciences Division for Global Problems in International Relations. And then lastly, Tom Countryman, who is Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation since September 2011. Somebody sent me his bio, and I was looking for something in it that directly related to Korea. And 32 years in the State Department, I'm sure he's dealt with Korea in various guises. But the bio had experience in the Middle East and Egypt, Arabic training, and so forth. But then I saw that you were once the foreign policy advisor to the Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. And I thought, there's a Korean connection for sure. So let's go. General Lee, you have the floor for the opening comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to discuss about North Korea and regional security with senior officers and civilian experts. Now I'll brief my opinion. The strategic environment of Asia-Pacific region, where both cooperation and conflict coexist among major countries recently, is very fluid and unstable. Especially North Korea's political, economic instability and nuclear missile threat act as major factors towards the situation of unrest in the Asia-Pacific region. North Korea is currently solidifying Kim Jong-un's monolithic system dictatorship through replacement with a close group of aides. Kim has seized power elite of the part government military and has strengthened the system of control against the military authorities. In order to secure support from the people, North Korea seeks to build its economy focused on light industry and agriculture to overcome its chronic economic woes and food shortage. Human rights situation has been severely worsened through strengthened political censorship and ideological control, political prisoner camp, and public execution. It is. In order to prevent the proliferation of outside information and weakening the regime, North Korea has a large amount of plutonium, has operated its uranium enrichment program, and has improved the yield and miniaturization technology through 3 nuclear tests. Currently, North Korea is maintaining the status in which an additional nuclear test and ballistic missile test launch are possible, as long as the political decision is made. As North Korea adheres to the parallel line that promotes both nuclear force and economic development, and as it makes its nuclear power as a fait accompli, North Korea is proceeding with the sophistication of its nuclear capability through nuclear test and ballistic missile test launch. Meanwhile, North Korea has also carried out disguised peace offensive to ease sanctions on North Korea and to secure aid to North Korea. North Korea's development, possession of a nuclear weapon and ballistic missile are not only direction violation of UN Security Council resolution and international non-proliferation regime, but also are provocation actions that cause the situation of unrest through arms race in the Asia-Pacific region and the proliferation of WMD. North Korea recently expressed a hardline position as it condemned against the annual ROK-US combined training and threatened to conduct nuclear tests. We evaluate such actions as deception tactics in order to evade the point of North Korean nuclear issue and to attain nuclear possession as a fait accompli. Also, we anticipate that North Korean regime's political instability and economic vulnerability will result in serious situations such as mass North Korean defectors, possibility of sudden change and collapse, human rights violation and humanitarian issues. North Korea's nuclear missile and regime instability have been acting as the greatest factors that threaten peace in the Korean Peninsula and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. North Korean regime's future that does not abandon its nuclear missile and that does not proceed with reform and opening its politics economy is a huge threat with risk and explosiveness that can disturb the security order of the Asia-Pacific region. Our Park Geun-hye administration has been pushing ahead with the trust-building process on Korean Peninsula and the Dresden Initiative in order to deter North Korea's military provocation and to develop inter-Korean relationship. In order to achieve peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region, the international community also should induce North Korea to proceed with proper direction. We view that in order to achieve this, close cooperation and mutual assistance necessary. It's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. You got to the point, and you did it exactly in 5 minutes, a good model for everyone. Justin Reyes, please.
Thanks. In order to try to take Mr. Lee as a model for keeping time, I'll limit myself to three main statements. The first one is that DPRK is not only a problem for regional security, but also for global security. The title of the panel is Implications for Regional Security, but I'd like to show why us Europeans and us French in particular worry about North Korea a great deal and are very concerned by the recent developments. Of course, we do take our regional obligations seriously. We do consider the fate of South Korea first, Japan and other countries that might be threatened by North Korea. France is still part of the UN Command and the Military Armistice Commission. It was part of the CEDAW in 1990s. Obviously, it was not part of the six-party talks, but has remained very much concerned and involved in these issues. But the point I want to make is that we see an increasingly global threat emanating from the DPRK because of the longer and longer range of North Korean missiles that threaten friends and allies as well. Take Guam, for example, and we are linked with the US by Article 5 of NATO, which would oblige us to a response in case the US was attacked. Second reason, and most importantly, proliferation. We saw what happened with Syria. We know that North Korea is selling a lot of different types of weapons, including the worst possible ones, nuclear weapons, or nuclear material at least, but also small weapons, including to Africa. And three, because of the threat to the global non-proliferation regime, and as a member of the P5, we are of course very concerned with this. The second statement is that the North Korean problem is not contained, it is growing. 20 years ago, so in 1994, the first nuclear crisis on the peninsula, few people thought that North Korea would last for very long. There was a famine, North Korea was losing its allies, etc. But, the fact is, it's still here. It's still here, and it has nukes, and it has missiles, and it has been modernizing both, and it will never turn back the clock. It will never turn back the clock, first because it is now a growing part of the North Korean state revenues, the sale of weapons, including nuclear material, estimated to up to 1/3 of state revenues, because it is written now in the constitution, and because, of course, North Korea has the examples of Iraq, Libya, and now more recently Ukraine, that you better keep your nuclear weapons if you don't want to be attacked, or if you don't want to see a part of your territory annexed by another one. It's safer to keep your nuclear weapons rather than exchange it for an agreement that might not be respected. I think we may have an impression of containment, but it's an illusion because of the modernization of the North Korean arsenal, because of proliferation, which I just mentioned, and also because of the erratic behavior of Pyongyang, and so the issue is getting more intractable and dangerous. And so unfortunately, the best we can hope for is to manage the problem rather than solving it. Which leads me to my third and final point. I think there are three key words to managing the DPRK. One is China, the other is unity, and the third one is consistency. I think China, among the different players, has more keys to that problems than others. After all, almost 80% of North Korean trade is done with China, which of course gives it leverage. There's a history of links between the two regimes. There's probably a better knowledge, even if I always pictured the North Korean regime as opaque to everyone external to it, but still. And also it's a nuclear power neighbor and member of P5 country, and so China should do even more than it is doing now. And I'm taking the example of Iran on the nuclear issue of Iran, on which China did play a constructive role, whether in 2010 with the UN resolution or more recently in November with the interim agreement, and we hope in July by helping negotiate the final agreement with Iran. And so I think that gives us at least a partial template for dealing with North Korea. The key here, or the second key rather, is unity. Strong unity is required, especially if we're considering a new round of sanctions, especially if a new test is done in the next few months. Hopefully not, but many experts think that it will happen. And we should aim at curbing proliferation and then going for the rollback, even if we don't have any illusion that we can roll back that program. That's what we should aim for. And so consistency is the last keyword, is the idea that the same way we dealt with Iran with a great deal of consistency, we should apply to North Korea, even if once again the odds are largely against us. But because of my second point that the problem is growing, I think that we have really no other realistic solution. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Justin, for, again, that precise enumeration of the issues. Your mention of China reminds me that although China is not on the panel, it's not by design, but by circumstance. I note that there are at least 5 delegates from China around the table, and I do expect that some of them will present a China perspective later. Dr. Alexander Dinkin, please.
Thank you. Well, I guess it's common knowledge and sad truth that decades-long efforts of international community to influence the nature of Pyongyang regime completely failed. And more than that, existing international institutions also failed to stop North Korean nuclear and missile programs. Why it happens? I guess because those two issues, the nature of regime and those military programs, is very difficult to separate. The nature of this totalitarian regime is that leadership must constantly demonstrate its legitimacy through shows of force. And this grandiose military display is the essence of both domestic and outside propaganda. The third nuclear test, announcing to the Korean public as well as to the outside world who is firmly in charge in town. And as it was before, North Korean nuclear and missile programs are the most important part of its national security, economic, and even foreign policy. Also, I guess that Mr. Gaddafi's fate and the whole Libyan story is a constant nightmare and a lesson for Pyongyang, which is learned very well. Several generations of Kim's family developed rather skillfully a strategy which let me call as a blackmail balance strategy. They constantly searched the balance between heavy investments in military build-up in the frame of so-called military-first policy, and economic hardship close to hunger. When economic crisis worsens, North gave some promises and received assistance packages from abroad. Then they violate these promises and the whole cycle repeats once more. The clear and simple evidence of this attitude is opening and closing of the Kaesong industrial complex. In foreign relations, Pyongyang strongly believes in bilateral engagements with Seoul, Washington, Beijing, Tokyo, or Moscow. For example, the latest development, receiving in Sweden some ease from Tokyo's special restrictions in exchange again for promises of comprehensive investigation of the kidnapped Japanese citizens. This situation of constant blackmail balance implemented by DPRK produced dangerous intentions of proliferation. Already last year, more than two-thirds of South Koreans, according to Chonsun Ilbo Daily, were in favor of the idea that Republic of Korea developed its own nuclear deterrent capabilities. This is alarming public opinion poll outcome, because if it happens, immediately Japan would step on this track, and clearly that both countries, Japan and Republic of Korea, have the technical capability to promptly create nuclear weapons. So what can be done to avoid this threatening proliferation scenario? In my perception, DPRK feels very uncomfortable when faces multilateral actions, such as UN Security Council resolutions. And I guess that we have one more platform, one more idle international institutions. I mean using six-party talks on North Korean nuclear program in order to initiate debate on security issues on Korean Peninsula in the format of the fifth group of these talks. I guess that would continue, that would allow us to continue multilateral talks, even if North Korea does not want to attend those meetings. One more instrument which we are elaborating in our institute is regular consultations and between Russia, China, and American security alliances with Japan and the Republic of Korea. I guess these multilateral efforts could also put some heat on the regime in Pyongyang. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dinkin. I'm taken by your suggestion that the six-party talks could continue, even minus North Korea. Unlike Iran, 5+1, it would be the 6-1. You will have all realized that I saved the best for last because Tom Countryman's Bureau is intimately involved in the policy development and management of issues concerning North Korea. So, Tom, over to you.
I'll let you judge what's best. But thank you, Mark, for this invitation. I want to thank IISS for the opportunity to talk about one of the most serious threats, not just to Asian peace and security, but as our colleague already said, also a threat to the integrity globally of the non-proliferation regime. I'll share the United States' perspective on North Korea and the tools that the international community has to tackle this growing challenge. Now, North Korea's challenge is decades old, but it has become more acute over the past few years. We see continued development of nuclear programs, including uranium enrichment, plutonium production, a third nuclear explosion. We've seen launches using ballistic missile technology, and we are subjected constantly to a crescendo of invective and threats in language that can only be described as sub-civilized, to conduct additional longer-range launches, new forms of nuclear tests, and aggression against its neighbors. And the DPRK continues to engage in proliferation of conventional weapons worldwide. All of this is in clear violation of United Nations Security Council decisions. These provocative developments are a serious and troubling escalation by North Korea. The United States remains fully committed to the defense of our allies, those most affected by this threat, in full coordination with them and with all the six-party partners. We continue to pursue a dual-track policy, engagement whenever possible, and pressure as necessary to make clear the choices North Korea faces. We are open to credible, meaningful multilateral negotiations to implement the 2005 joint statement and to bring North Korea into compliance with its United Nations obligations. But we are not interested in talking just for the sake of talks. We will not respond to irresponsible behavior with concessions or inducements. We will respond positively if North Korea demonstrates that it is serious about denuclearization. But we haven't yet seen any such indication, have not seen a serious commitment to complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. The opposite has occurred. The regime has elevated the pursuit of nuclear weapons technology to the level of a national priority. We have no illusion that North Korea will voluntarily end its pursuit of nuclear weapons. And that is why, even as we keep alive the prospect for a negotiated resolution, enhanced pressure remains critical to compelling Pyongyang to correct course and to choose denuclearization rather than continuing to choose instability, isolation, and poverty. The success of this approach depends in a very large part on coordinated efforts with our six-party partners and, in particular, China. The Republic of Korea, Japan, Russia are all important partners. But China has a unique historic, diplomatic, and economic ties with North Korea and the greatest capacity to shape North Korea's choices. President Obama and President Xi made a commitment that we will deepen our bilateral engagement on North Korea and on non-proliferation writ large. As a neighboring country with a strong economy, China is the first line of defense against North Korea's non-proliferation activities. Beijing and Washington have worked together well to adopt strong UN Security Council resolutions. China has taken major steps to implement more completely the United Nations sanctions regimes concerning North Korea as well as Iran. Despite these positive developments, Iran and North Korea continue to rely on China's economy as the primary source of supply for the high technology and materials needed for their prescribed programs. China can do more to prevent such exports, and the U.S. will continue to work cooperatively with Beijing to that end. But I want to emphasize that the threat posed by North Korea is not just a threat to South Korea or Japan or China or the United States. The responsibility to deny to North Korea the technical and financial resources it needs to build such weapons is a responsibility not just of the United States or China or other states. It is a responsibility that extends beyond China, beyond the U.S., beyond the five parties. It is a responsibility shared by the entire international community, including the rapidly growing economies of Southeast Asia, which must face this issue with equal dedication. North Korea's global efforts to export conventional weapons amounts to the export of instability to other regions. And the export of conventional weapons also provides North Korea with a critical source of hard currency for its weapons of mass destruction programs. This is why the UN Security Council has explicitly forbidden not only the import of WMD material to North Korea, but also the export of conventional weapons. The UN panel of experts has documented several times North Korea's use of ever more sophisticated techniques to conceal proliferation and to evade sanctions. These practices often make states unwitting participants in North Korea's proliferation, exposing other countries and their territories to, and their financial and commercial and transportation sectors to exploitation and abuse. Now, closing and constricting all avenues of proliferation to and from North Korea, as well as Iran and Syria, places a special responsibility on the major supplier and transshipment states. This responsibility means, first, a firm and proactive commitment to implementation of the UN decisions. Secondly, an effective export control system to support and facilitate enforcement. And third, strict vigilance and the will to act within the letter and spirit of those resolutions. This is hard work. The U.S. works very hard with our Asia-Pacific partners, with ASEAN, with individual states, to build counterproliferation capacity and to build political will. We participate in several programs that strengthen the export control infrastructure in Asia. The Proliferation Security Initiative is one example. 104 countries have now endorsed the PSI, and just within the last year, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam have done the same. We admire states like Singapore and Malaysia, who have done so much to pass and implement meaningful legislation on strategic trade control. And we meet our other non-proliferation responsibilities to our Asian partners. We hope that in the near future, the P5 states will sign the protocol to the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty, which provides assurances to states in the region against the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. This wide-ranging approach is necessary because the DPRK's nuclear challenge is not a bilateral issue, it's not a six-party issue, it's not a regional issue, it is a global issue. The entire world needs to speak with one voice to make clear we will not accept North Korea as a nuclear-armed state. North Korea cannot pursue nuclear weapons, cannot export conventional weapons without cost to itself, and any further provocations by the North will come only with a very heavy cost to the North. We hope all states will join the growing international effort to shine a light on the massive human rights abuses within North Korea. We believe strongly that bringing North Korea into compliance with its own obligations and commitments will require a comprehensive, concerted, and collective effort, not by one country or two or five, but by all states that have a stake in peace and security in Asia and beyond. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was very good. Now, I'm sorry that we don't have the fancy technology of putting your badge into a microphone, so we'll do it the old-fashioned way of putting placards vertically. And I see Aidan Foster Carter and then Dr. Shirk. Aidan, please.
Thank you very much to all of us. Thank you very much indeed to all of the panel. I just want to toss out a few additional points very, very briefly, really, to most of them to everybody. First of all, what difference does the panel think the arrival of Kim Jong-un has made? We often stress the continuity of North Korea. I think he's made a difference. I think there is actually a new unpredictability, as if we didn't have enough already. The rhetoric we saw last year and the rhetoric this. And usually with Kim Jong-il, it was fairly clear what he wanted. Eventually, it might have been something outrageous. It's not at all clear to me, in general, what Kim Jong-un's game plan is, except, of course, very interestingly now with Japan. If I'm allowed to say, I see Mr. Funabashi is here. I would love to hear his view on what is, whether he thinks that Abe-san will succeed where Koizumi-san, about which he wrote very brilliantly, failed. That's one thing. Another thing, how do we prioritize the North Korean bads? There are about 10 of them. You all know what they are, and I'm not going to list them. We were reminded about the human rights issue graphically by the report this year, but will it always go on the back burner? Will nukes always be number one, etc., etc.? Thirdly, will somebody please tell me the source of a quote, which I wish I'd made up, but I didn't, and whether it's right. Who was it who said that the problem with North Korea is it's always right at the top of the bottom of the US president's in tray, or possibly of Barack Obama's in tray? The point is more general. I wish I'd thought of that line. I think it's true. Other things are happening in the world. The western arc of Asia has kept people pretty busy. I understand strategic patience. It does look a lot like doing nothing, I'm sorry to say. And finally, can I plead as a mere humble citizen on the issue of contingency plans, which have been much in the news? I don't expect you to tell me, but Victor Jha has made this point for a long time, and I don't always agree with Victor. I agree on this. The US and the ROK have one set of plans. The People's Republic of China, we have reason to believe, has another set of plans. I just want to be reassured that you guys are coordinating, and indeed I don't mean to rule out Russia, other neighbouring states, and Japan as well. Nothing could be worse. Well, a North Korean collapse would be dangerous, but anyway, a collapse which, because of inattention and lack of preparation and lack of coordination, led to a superpower confrontation. I don't even want to think about it. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. To interpret to everyone one of the things you said, when you said how to prioritize North Korean bads, I heard you say badge, and I'm thinking 10 different kinds of badges, but I got it. It's bad things, right? Yes, got it.
Well, I have a couple of comments and then a question that I hope will draw our Chinese friends out to talk about current Chinese perspective on North Korea. My impression from informal discussion with Chinese friends is that there is a Chinese views of North Korean policy and of the entire regime are at an all-time low, and that the public as well as the elite are really very fed up with Pyongyang. And I just wonder what it will take for China to divorce North Korea. And will a fourth nuclear test do it? Will more revelations about internal terror and violence or anything like that do it? So I really want to hear from Professor Jin and others about what their views are. And a related question to Tom Countryman, I thought I heard you say something about the DPRK relying on China for the high technology for its programs. Did you say that? And I know that, of course, DPRK is economically dependent on its relationship with China. That's its lifeline for pretty much all of its foreign trade that enables it to survive at a fairly low level, but still survive economically. But I wasn't aware of the fact that we thought that China was assisting DPRK nuclear program with technology. Is that what you said? Okay. I just heard it wrong? Okay, good.
We've got two Chinese on the list, so we'll get to them in a minute. But first we'll go to Bob James and then Mr. Mine.
It's not on. No. Does South Korea have a plan for salvaging or absorbing North Korea if North Korea collapses either internally or because of some kind of conflict. West Germany did have such a plan. It was difficult and expensive as hell, but it sort of worked. And is China likely to object in some way, militarily, I guess, if China sees South Korea doubling its size and power over a decade or so as it takes over North Korea? They would then have probably Japan and Korea to be fourth and fifth largest economic countries right next door to them, and all of them allied to the United States in some way. Would China do something?
Mr. Mine?
Thank you. One difficulty is that we have to make reasonable argument to discuss the unreasonable facts in and around North Korea. I would like to, having said this, I would like to make just a few comments, a couple of comments. One is the China's role. I heard from a few people on the podium that we still have good reason to expect China to play a bigger role in the persuading North Korea to come back to more reasonable lines. But I think it is always true that China may have somewhat adjusted the way they deal with North Korea about a year ago, and that's quite right. But at the same time, I would like to point out the role of the United States, because I think for North Koreans, the biggest expectation is directed towards the United States. That unreasonable state has been consistent in saying that the biggest problem is the threat by the United States. You believe it or not, this is another question, but still there's a certain type of consistency. So now, the last year, October last year, in Tokyo, we had 2+2 with the United States. Japan had 2+2 meeting with the United States. And in the question and answer session, Secretary Kerry even mentioned that the United States is ready to consider or review the possibility of having a non-aggression pact with North Korea. This is a very important remark, but unfortunately, I think Kim Jong-un was a bit too busy, perhaps too busy with the Chan Son-taek or either with other things. But anyway, it just came out from the question and answer session. But I just hope that the United States would be prepared to come back to the position again sometime in the future, because I believe it helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd ask Dr. Xia Jiping, and after him, it'll be Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Chairman. I enjoy the full presentation. China has two major goals as to the Korean Peninsula. One is nuclear non-proliferation, is nuclear weapon-free Korean Peninsula. The second is stability on the Korean Peninsula. Since Xi Jinping, Chinese leader Xi Jinping, took power, China has put the nuclear weapon-free Korean Peninsula as the top priority. And also China made great efforts try to persuade North Korea to follow China's example, to have some kind of reform and openness, but it's very difficult. And also, recently, I think since the end of last year, China also has give some pressure on North Korea, including suspension of oil supply for several months, and also some food assistance to North Korea. And also, I think China make great efforts to prevent North Korea from having a new nuclear test. And also, I think China make it clear to North Korea, and even I think send very serious warnings to North Korea, asking North Korea not to have another nuclear test. And also, I think China has followed the UN Security Council resolution to have sanctions on North Korea. So I think China's role as to the North Korea to prevent North Korea from nuclear to having nuclear weapons, I think quite positive. But it's very difficult for China, and also I think although now international community, including China, now put quite a heavy pressure on North Korea. However, now Kim Jong-un now has North Korea already has a nuclear weapon capability, and also Kim Jong-un regard the nuclear weapons as most important pillars to support its regime. So now it's very difficult to ask to pressure North Korea to give up nuclear weapons. But I think if China, the United States, South Korea, and Russia, if we can make greater efforts, continue to have great efforts, we can manage North Korea nuclear crisis, and also finally can resolve North Korea nuclear issue. Although it will take a very long time, and since Obama administration in office, Obama administration pursues a policy of strategic patience towards North Korea. Now I have a question for Mr. Congressman. So will the United States readjust its policy towards North Korea or not? I mean, will the United States have some revisions of its policy towards North Korea? To some extent, in what way? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shia. In a blog post in Shangri-La Voices a couple of days ago, I gave credit to China for persuading North Korea not to test a nuclear weapon, and I've been expecting to be proven wrong any day. But I hope that you will continue to be right. Dr. Wang, you have the floor, and if in your answer you are able to answer the question posed by Bob James about whether China would object if South Korea doubles in size, that would be appreciated. Well, you don't have to, but you could.
I first raise the question and then to maybe try to. The question is, China probably the most country against nuclear weapon, North Korea, for two reasons. China is surrounded by nuclear weapons. Can you imagine we surrounded by so many nuclear weapons countries, like from Russia, Japan, Korea, Iran, Pakistan, India, so many. So North Korea is a threat to nuclear. North Korea is a threat to China. Definitely, we are against this. And most importantly, the nuclear test conducted by North Korea is just 100 miles away from the Chinese northeastern provinces. So what's the feeling of the Chinese? So we definitely not support the nuclear weapons, North Korea. But I had the chance to talk with the North Korea guys last summer in China Academy of Social Sciences. He raised two questions to me. Number one, it seems like Obama pivot back to Asia, but not pivot back to the Korean Peninsula. So the North Korean nuclear issue is not a top agenda for Obama administration. You are too busy to handle so many other challenges, not North Korea nuclear issues, which make the North Korea guys, to attract the attention to the missile tests or whatever, to attract your attention. So it's the eyes on U.S., not eyes on China. Even we have some leverage, but it's just more economic and for human rights of the survival of the regime. It's not just to you say I don't think can impact of the North Korea to give up the nuclear weapons. Secondly, he also raised the question. At the beginning, he said it's a denuclearization in the whole Korean Peninsula, including the South Korea, the nuclear weapons. But now you remove or departure the nuclear weapons from the South Korea, right? But then he raised another question. How about Okinawa? You have the Japan, U.S. airlines. They consider that Okinawa, you have the nuclear weapons or facilities, or has if you need, it's easy for you to departure nuclear weapons in Okinawa. This is a threat to North Korea. I don't know the real situation, so maybe American friends can explain in these two important excuses to convince North Korea back to the six-party talks. I think this is a very important question. I don't know the details. And a quick response to Susan Sheik. You said we have a marriage with North Korea. One man, one wife. We don't have so many wives. North Korea is not a marriage. We don't have the marriage with North Korea. Some Americans put forward so-called G2 marriage. It's a kind of new model of the major countries' relations. Maybe North Korea nuclear issue is a gift for our new marriage. Actually, we work very, very well after the Xi to cooperate and to solve this North Korea problem. So this is not like a marriage. It's the problem of.
Okay, so you didn't have a prenuptial agreement. There's no marriage. And Aidan, I think he answered your question. The person who coined that phrase was a North Korea guy about the issue at the top of the bottom of the inbox. I'm going to ask Nick Beasley and then Dana Allen and Lieutenant Colonel Liu to speak. If anybody in the back benches wants to catch my attention, there is a microphone back there, so you're not shut out. And then I think we will then go back to the panel, but we'll see if anybody else wants to comment. So, Nick.
Thanks, Mark. I really wanted just to get the panel's views on, I guess, what you could call economic reform or the prospects of economic reform in North Korea. We've seen the experiment with the special economic zones begin to flourish, investment from China begin to occur, and I guess echoing the sort of remarks that Justin Vase pointed out, that North Korea looks a bit more robust now than it did a few years ago, and I think one of the foundations of that seems to be some kind of economic revitalisation. I mean, these things are all relative, but so I wonder what the panel's thoughts are about that, and particularly about the growth of the various special economic zones. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Dana?
Thanks, Mark. The idea of the concept of regime change as a solution to problems is not hugely fashionable anymore. But in the issue of survival, of exactly a year ago, the normally mild-mannered Mark Fitzpatrick wrote, North Korea's bellicose actions and statements since late 2012 reinforced the conclusion that in the long run, there is only one happy ending to the long-running tragedy: unification of the Korean Peninsula as a democratic, free enterprise-based republic that would be free of nuclear weapons. And, I can't formulate a question that actually invites serious comment on regime change as an immediate or even medium-term policy. But given the unanimity of dark pictures presented here, including, I might add, from our Russian colleague, intellectually, is there any other way to think of this problem being solved?
Thank you, Dana, and thank you for the shout-out. Lieutenant Colonel Liu.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, all the speakers here. Every time when we're talking about North Korea's nuclear problem, China is a key word. So it's very funny, and it's also my responsibility to give some response. It has been a quite difficult time for me to talk about the North Korean nuclear issue with the recent development and the declaration of DPRK's fourth nuclear test. I'm very much concerned about the development of DPRK's nuclear program. However, talking about DPRK's nuclear problem or any proliferation problem, I have to emphasize that the nuclear problem is more security and military than technical in nature. I know that the international society is very forgetful and has no patience to trace back, so let's look into the future. I noticed that recent months, DPRK's government has kept trying to open a third country channel to create a negotiation platform in order to talk directly with U.S. And after the consolidation of Kim Jong-un's governance of its domestic stability, it is the first priority of its government to develop its economy. In this regard, DPRK needs a favorable international and neighboring environment. To be practical, it's time to continue the negotiation effort for all parties concerned, because as some of you mentioned, the nuclear proliferation is not only a threat to the security stability of Asia, but also a threat to the world non-proliferation regime. China has done more than the outside world now to persuade North Korea into resumption the denuclearization talks. But the influence of China is quite limited. I want to tell you why. Maybe some of the points has been forgotten by the international society. First, North Korea is a sovereignty state. Secondly, sanction means something but cannot be sustainable. Thirdly, China has exhausted all the possible resources to persuade North Korea into talking and will insist on that. My question, one short question goes to Mr. Countryman, if it's possible that Obama administration had the will and energy to handle with DPRK's nuclear problem with the positive development of Iran's nuclear negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Yu. I think we all heard you say that China has exhausted all the available options. Some might differ with that, but I think we'll go back to the panel now, and we'll go in. Oh, wait a minute. Before we do that, I see one other comment from Mr. Yang. And then we'll go back to the panel.
Just one observation about what's going on here, what's being discussed here. My observation is about the security dilemma in Northeast Asia in terms of the U.S. stakes in this region and China's response. There is a growing consensus here in China that the U.S. pivot to Asia is actually based on the legacy of the Cold War, which came to an end in 1991. The U.S. deliberately, somehow, to keep the Korean Peninsula divided and China divided with the Taiwan Straits to justify its 70,000 forward military presence in Northeast Asia. And based on the tough rhetoric by Secretary Chuck Hagel this morning, it's actually a blunt warning against China's maritime claims. China will not only get closer to Russia by whatever means, but to perhaps keep the picture alive about the tensions of the nuclear-armed DPRK period.
Okay, so one more important issue tabled. Tom, I think most the largest number of questions were posed to you, including can't you walk and chew gum at the same time?
Yeah, I got that.
You got that one? Okay. But why don't you take the time you need to address, including this last important one about isn't the policy all just a ruse?
And the very latest one on blunt rhetoric, deeply appreciated. Look, the most important thing I learned in all my years of education, I learned in second grade, which is if you speak to your teacher with the same tone of voice that she speaks to you, you will be punished. But sometimes I forget that anyway, and sometimes the United States uses blunt rhetoric, even with people who use blunt rhetoric with the United States or with smaller neighbors as well. I'd rather have blunt discussions than middle-of-the-night military maneuvers. Now, let's try to take these points one at a time. Susan, you quoted me correctly the first time and incorrectly the second time. North Korea does obtain the majority of the material it needs from outside of North Korea for its weapons programs from the Chinese economy. Iran does obtain the majority of its technological requirements for missiles and nuclear weapons from Chinese companies. Those are both facts. That does not mean that the Chinese government is assisting either program. I did not say assisting. The Chinese government is constantly improving its ability to enforce its own laws and UN resolutions. But let's face it, China is the second biggest capitalist economy in the world, and there are a lot of firms that are eager to sell things. And that is where North Korean and Iranian procurement networks are very important, and where government efforts in the U.S., in China, but also in Singapore, Malaysia, in other countries, are necessary to prevent Iran and North Korea from acquiring such materials. But it is absolutely not a Chinese government policy of assisting those programs. Can the U.S. walk and chew gum at the same time? I mean, I find it fascinating that your advice is that North Korea must be the number one issue for the United States, but it cannot be the number one issue for China. It does seem a little bit further away from the United States than it does from China. The fact is the United States does not have the option of choosing one issue at a time. And the United States also does not have the option of not engaging on North Korea, and we also don't have a requirement to inform everybody what we are doing. The fact is, U.S. diplomacy is active on North Korea. It is especially active in what we judge to be the most productive channel, which is engagement with the People's Republic of China. We have the capability to speak to the North Koreans. We have a channel. We use it. But at the moment, on the central issue of North Korean provocations, we have no desire to engage in a discussion solely on North Korea's terms, which I think a number of people here have recommended today. I even heard the point of view that North Korea has been consistent, that it wants to address what it sees as the U.S. threat to North Korean security. Well, damn it, the U.S. is consistent. We want to talk about nuclear weapons. It is what China agrees is the primary issue. If we're not going to talk about that, we're not going to talk. That's a consistent policy. If we are going to talk about denuclearization, if North Korea can say that, we will have a productive discussion about denuclearization and about North Korea's security concerns. And we've been 100% clear about that. It is not U.S. unwillingness to listen to North Korea that is preventing discussion. It is North Korean unwillingness to admit that there is a history here, that there was a basis for our previous discussions, a basis that the North Koreans tore up and threw away and don't wish to return to. There won't be a problem in discussing what North Korea wants to discuss when they acknowledge that the purpose of the six-party talks is to discuss denuclearization. We do look to China to influence that. I cannot accept the idea that China has exhausted all of its options. I think China is a major power. President Obama and President Xi agreed that we are building a new type of relationship between major powers. It is the first topic that the U.S. and Chinese Foreign Minister and Secretary of State discuss when they talk to each other. To say that this major power has exhausted all of its options against one of the most pathetic countries on earth, I think is a selective understatement of China's real strengths. We work with China because China's diplomacy can be effective, because China can decide how rigorously it wants to enforce sanctions against luxury imports into North Korea. We work with China because our two presidents agreed this is one of our key areas together, because it tests the model of a new type of major power relationship. And we work with China because the Chinese attitude towards North Korea is evolving in what we consider to be a positive direction. And that is happening because the North Korean attitude of arrogance towards the entire world, including China, is evolving in a negative direction. Those are some very good reasons for continuing to work with China. I apparently have a higher opinion of Chinese capabilities than some folks in China do, because I do not believe that the options are anywhere near exhausted. I know there were other questions, but let me just stop there and give a chance to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was pretty clear. It was very clear. Alexander, may I ask you to go next?
Well, I guess that among panelists there were agreement that international unity is helpful medicine for solving the issue. The second agreement was that China is a very important player in this regard. For example, we have only 17 kilometers border with North Korea, and Chinese border is much bigger. About unpredictability, this is your question, I guess, is growing unpredictability in comparison with what we have before, because in my perception, maybe I'm mistaken, before we have sort of, in a way, collective ruling. Today we have one-man show in this city, so unpredictability is growing. But I agree with Mr. Countryman that North Korea issue is wider than Korean Peninsula. This is a completely international issue. But I am afraid that in current circumstances of not if divorce, but separation between US and China, this issue hardly could be managed.
Thank you, Alexander. Justin, if you could address any of the points that...
Yeah, there was no question directed at me, so I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say, perhaps to follow up on my neighbor's comments, that unity is key. I do believe that sanctions are a key tool here, and I don't see why they would not be sustainable. After all, sanctions are what made Iran get back to the table of negotiations last year. They are what influenced the outcome of the election of a year ago in Iran, and so I do believe they are indeed a useful and important tool. Now, of course, they cannot achieve everything, but given the other options, which is either to do nothing or to engage in kinetic operations, I certainly prefer to see that. There are a couple of other points, but I'll leave the floor now.
Okay. Thank you. And lastly, General Lee, I think you will be speaking in Korean, so if delegates who do not speak Korean wish to avail themselves of the headset, now would be a good time to do so.
I would like to make 3 points. First of all, many of you have talked about that what would be the priority in terms of North Korea's bad deed. And from ROK's point of view, among all of the North Korean bad deeds, it would be the nuclear development activities that are the most threatening. And that poses the most realistic and grave situation. So that really calls for urgency. And because North Korea, DPRK, has been claiming that their development activities due to their safe defense against the U.S. threat. And because of their development activities, DPRK is posing grave threat to the ROK. And also, they have been pursuing more conventional weapons activity as well. So this really poses a very realistic threat to us, and this is a matter of significance to us. My second point being is regime change or a big shift in the DPRK. It is our opinion that we are of the same ancestor. However, that we have experienced division and also experienced the Korean War. So South Koreans also believe that we need to see the reunification of the peninsula. However, a sudden change, including a collapse, is a very dangerous option or situation for us as well, because it could cause serious disruption as well as a situation that would be out of control. So even if we do pursue unification, that would also carry a lot of burden and side effects. That is why unification of the Korean Peninsula should be pursued in a peaceful manner and a stable manner, and amid support from all the neighboring countries. That is what we believe is the best model for unification. My third point is North Korea is pursuing economic development and what we should do with it. Currently, North Korea's infrastructure is near collapse, and they are in depletion of many of their resources. So they are faced with a famine of the people and a lot of economic difficulties. In order to resolve the situation that they're currently in, what they need is support and economic aid from neighboring countries. But as you know, the current situation, because of the missile issues or nuclear testing threat, they are seeing unwillingness to follow up on the obligations that they made, the promises that they made to the international community. That is why I believe that despite the threat to the survival of the people, they need to follow the models of Vietnam or China and pursue economic reform. Thank you.
Thank you, General Lee, and I'm grateful to you that you addressed some of the other questions that had been posed. I realize that there are some questions left hanging there, questions like Nick's about economic robust activity. And it would have been nice to have had a North Korean here to address some of these questions. Every year I try to persuade the North Koreans to come, and they don't show any interest. But some of you here have relations from time to time with North Koreans, and if you feel disposed toward using your own good relations to encourage them to attend this multilateral paradiplomatic event, we would be in your debt. So maybe next year we will have a little bit revised panel if we could bring that about. But even without a North Korean, I think we had a very good panel and addressed the issue from different perspectives, not necessarily their country's government perspective in the case of Alexander. But I'd like to ask you to all join me in thanking the panelists and the participants who joined in this rich discussion. And I have two logistical announcements I'm supposed to make. The first is that you're supposed to leave your name board either in this room or outside. I guess that means don't take it back to your hotel, your bedroom. That's the only other option. And the second thing is those who are invited to the Istana should assemble in the foyer at 7:10. Thank you again, and see you all later on. 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 Later on.